Let's talk about some Big Ten offensive line recruiting. All right, guys. So it's been interesting because the Big Ten has historically not been great in recruiting. However, since 2020, actually in 2020, they got the top 3 offensive linemen in 24/7 Sports offensive lineman class. All the top 3 guys went to Big Ten schools. Well, now in 2021, 4 of the top 10 offensive linemen in 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings went to Big Ten schools. And then again in 2024, 4 of the top 10 the top 10 24/7 recruits went to Big Ten schools. And now this year, 8 of the top 10 offensive lineman recruits in the 24/7 top 10 offensive linemen are seriously considering some kind of Big Ten school. Now, obviously that helps because Oregon, USC, teams like those are also being considered. But guys, it's important for the Big Ten, I feel like, to do a good job in recruiting and to get those good players. I believe it brings, notoriety, brings prestige in those ways, but also it just makes your team better. So Connor, we'll start with you. Do you think it's realistic to think that the Big Ten could sign 4 or maybe even more of these top 10 offensive linemen in the 24/7 Sports top 10 rankings this year?
I mean, I hate to keep bringing them up, but you look at a team like Iowa and you would never think that they'd have the number 1 overall tackle from his class.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that it's kind of like where he's from, and that's going to happen. There's going to be top talent from all sorts of states. But I think when you look at how the Big Ten produces these linemen consistently year in and year out, and if the caliber of teams like Iowa are getting talent like that, then yes, you are going to consistently see them top to bottom all get all this time. Like Wisconsin is one of those powerhouses. And I was looking through some of those names, and a lot of these guys, have all the big offers from SEC, and that's always going to be the schools that are listed. But you always see these guys taking a visit or two up to all these schools just to let them know that they are interested. So that's where they always have a chance. And I would not be surprised to see them continue.
Right. And I mean, Iowa, they're contending for, I'm going to botch his last name, but Andrew Babalola. He's uncommitted right now, the number 3 tackle in the nation. Dude's from Kansas.
We have a teammate of his committed to us right now who is a 4-star, so that always helps. I mean, doesn't guarantee anything, but nice to have those connections.
Right. And I don't think people realize how much Iowa recruits outside of the state of Iowa. Like I made a post earlier today, like Iowa has 4 strong prospects in the state of Florida right now. Iowa is one of the Big Ten schools with the most strong prospects in the state of Florida right now. Like you wouldn't think it thinking Iowa, but like Kirk Ferentz is doing work out there in Florida, really going after those guys. So, and they regularly sign guys from Idaho as well, from Texas. I mean, they go into all of these different kinds of states and sign guys. Now it's not always the 5-star top tier guy, but Iowa, they go out there and recruit, and to see them going after a guy in Kansas, like that's a pretty good shot for them to be able to do that. Zach, your thoughts on the Big Ten possibly signing 4 or more of the top 10 24/7 offensive linemen in this class?
I certainly think it's possible. I think the thing that I'm just looking at where they're from. You look at David Sanders, he's from Charlotte, North Carolina. Josh Petty from Roswell, Georgia. Babalola from Kansas. Solomon Thomas, who's committed to Florida State, he's from Florida. You go up the list, there's not many who are in the North. Obviously Carter Lowe is an Ohio State.
Carter Lowe is
from Ohio. But there's not a ton that are squarely in the South either. You got a guy from Bishop Gorman who's that's Nevada. Couple Texas guys, guy from Kansas, but then you have some guys from North Carolina and Virginia. And so I think it's always hard to get guys from the South to come north. But I think the guys in Virginia, Kansas, from North Carolina, you've got better shots there. And then every once in a while you pull a shocker, out of Texas or out of Florida. I know Ohio State pulled one, Nicholas Petit Frere, several years ago out of Florida.
Right. I think he was in that 2021 class or 2020.
Yeah, he was it was a shocker that he committed. But that's, I think that is one key. That's why I think getting Florida State and some combination of Georgia Tech or Virginia really would help the Big Ten in the long run as well. But the other thing to keep in mind is there are better recruiting teams coming into the Big Ten. So you've got USC, you've got Oregon. Penn State has been a little bit better as of late in recruiting. Obviously, Iowa has had some big recruiting wins. Wisconsin had a decent recruiting class, and the big names in the SEC outside of Kirby Smart, like they're not as prevalent anymore, right? Like Saban used to get anybody he wanted. He's gone, and Kalen DeBoer is not. He's not a great recruiter. Like he's a good recruiter. He's not great. I think Sark still has some work to do. I think he's a good recruiter. Venables is a good recruiter, but like there's nobody down there aside from Kirby Smart where I'm like, oh yes, they are without a shadow of a doubt like a closer. Where I think you might have more equal footing now in the Big Ten in terms of recruiting acumen. So the real difficulty is location.
Right.
But you have coaches who can go pull guys out. I think Dan Lanning might be the best recruiter in terms of head coach. It's probably between him and Ryan Day. But I think between those guys and some of the more solid recruiters, I think you could see this easily being in favor of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it kind of like those top recruiting guys like you were talking about. Like you asked me who's a better recruiter, Kirby Smart or Ryan Day. I think Kirby Smart has the edge, but I also think Kirby Smart is in a better location. So like, would Ryan Day be recruiting just as well as Kirby Smart if he was down in Georgia like Kirby Smart is? Who knows? But I also think Dan Lanning is a better recruiter than Steve Sarkisian, and then like I try to think of like, well, who's the third best recruiter? Maybe Brent Venables, but like, is it Lane Kiffin? Like, is he the third best recruiter in the SEC? And it's like, well, I think James Franklin is better than both of them. Like it's kind of crazy because when you get down to like the nitty gritty of it, I think obviously Kirk Ferentz does a better job than I think people give him credit for at Iowa, but like I couldn't compare, Billy Napier to Greg Schiano. I don't have enough information to do that, but I would say it's equal enough that if the Big Ten starts really putting the emphasis on recruiting here in the next 3 or 4 years, I mean, obviously I don't think it's going to happen this year, but here in the next 3 or 4 years, especially if this talent continues to spread out more like we're seeing it do, and Iowa go into Florida and some of these other guys go into other places, like you can see the Big Ten start recruiting better than the SEC. It's not likely, but
especially in the transfer portal too, though, you never know what could happen.
Yeah.
You can see guys for leaving Florida to come up to Iowa just for the sole focus of playing time. So you never know.
Yeah. An NIL is very much an X factor. I know we talked about it a lot, but I think most Big Ten schools will have very competent NIL in the next several years. Like I don't think it's just going to be Ohio State because of the alumni backing, because of the media rights deal. They're all getting the same amount, and that's going to help maybe the lower tier schools. Like I think Iowa, I appreciate you bringing up the transfer portal, Connor, because I think Iowa is one of those schools that if they find a way to really like weaponize is the wrong word, but that's the one that came to mind. Weaponize their NIL. Like you really could have a dominant presence in terms of offensive line. And I think you could do that from the word go with recruiting too. Cause I think you can point to past NFL drafts and be like, do you want to be a top 5 NFL draft pick?
That's what I'm saying, man. I agree.
Especially if you're a tight end.
Yeah.
Yeah. No
tackle.
Hence the jersey behind you there, Connor.
Shout out my boy.
Jeff brings up another good point here. I wonder if USC will be able to recruit O-line guys in the Big Ten country, Ohio State on the West Coast. That's interesting. I think, like I said, I think USC is going to do better in recruiting here going forward because, it's just them, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and obviously they have the advantage down in Southern California because there's Big 12 teams down there. But like, if you want to play real big ball, like you're not going to go to a Big 12 team. Sorry, Big 12, but you're not on the Big 10 level. It just is what it is. Yeah. But like I could totally see USC, like if they have a good batch of O-linemen in a few different classes, if Lincoln Riley really like commits to trying to get those O-linemen and maybe, takes a class off from, paying millions of NIL dollars to a quarterback, then, maybe that could happen. But yeah, I think a lot of USC's dependence on them working out in the Big Ten and contending, being that tier 1 team, is for California to be producing good offensive linemen, number 1, and number 2, for Lincoln Riley to be putting in the effort and putting in the prioritizing to say, we need to get these offensive linemen. Listen to the Big Ten Huddle. Please do like and subscribe. We appreciate that. If this was your first time listening, we are the Big Ten Huddle. We cover all things Big Ten football and basketball. We have a long episode every Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, all at 9 o'clock. So come in, check us out, get in the chat, let us know what you're thinking. We would love to have you join us and learn more about the Big Ten.